Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Bipartisan Policy Center. It's a place where we try to find common ground on some difficult policy issues and in a town that seems daily to be more divided than the day before. But having said that, we're going to address one of those very difficult issues this morning that affects so many Americans and families in a very personal way. I'm Bill Hoagland. I have the pleasure of overseeing the work of our health team here, led by Catherine Hayes, who would be up here instead of me if it were not for the loss of her voice this morning. And right. That's right. In this era of facts and counterfacts, I think the evidence is unequivocal that patients that have complex care needs cost more and often receive less quality care. And I think this is especially true when I look at the facts, and the experts will tell us here, as it relates to the dual eligibles, the Medicare, Medicaid dual individuals. And for those with multiple chronic conditions and cognitive or functional impairments, I think we also know that care models that incorporate the needs of patients and their families into the plan of care can improve the patient quality and patient experience. And at the same time, we know successful care models have been shown to lower hospital admissions, emergency department visits, and actually save dollars. And today we're issuing a policy roadmap for individuals with complex care needs. Now, it's a compilation of recommendations that the BPC Health Leadership Team under Senators Daschle, Senator Frist, Dr. Rivlin, Governor Tommy Thompson worked along with the staff over the last couple of years to put together. And we should also give a real shout out to the support that we received from this from the SCAN Foundation, most importantly, but also the Commonwealth Fund, Robert Wood Johnson, and the Peterson Foundation. Now, among the recommendations are proposals to provide more flexibility to plans that operate under a budget or a benchmark, such as Medicare Advantage. As an old budgeteer, I am always happy to know that the evidence supports that these goals can be achieved without adding cost to the government or to patients. I'm also very happy to state that some of these recommendations have been incorporated into the Senate-passed Chronic Care Act, or have been included in some proposed regulations. But we can also go further, and I think then, and to address these issues. And I hope, we all hope, that the House will complete action on the chronic bill before the end of this session of Congress. We've included recommendations to make private long-term care insurance more affordable and to encourage greater use of home and community-based care in Medicaid. Now, we stopped short, it's a difficult issue, of a possible tax-financed catastrophic care program, partly, largely for fiscal issues, but also political reasons going forward. So today, we will have a discussion about these recommendations and some of the steps that can move us toward improved care for patients with these complex needs. And we will also discuss the importance of finding more comprehensive solutions to address long-term care costs. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the real experts here. We are very, very fortunate to have Ann Thompson lead the discussion with the experts. You have Ann's impressive bio. I want to give a special shout out, though, to her founding of Innovations in Daughterhood, which is an organization that provides a very major service to families trying to navigate complex elder care system. So, Ann, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can introduce your panel.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm really happy to be here this morning, and especially with this panel. So as Bill said, you know, 10%, about 10% of the Medicare population accounts for about 60% of the spending. And the people who make up this population are not people with really simple needs. These are people who have a very multidimensional set of needs that often last for a really long period of time. And I think probably the panel would agree with me, and you can argue with me if you disagree, that our healthcare system and our long-term care system today do not do a good job of meeting these needs. And even though I think we're making enormous progress in addressing some of the inadequacies of the system and making it a little bit more person-centered and better financed, we have a long way to go. And I'm just was so grateful to have an opportunity to be part of the work that the BPC did in making these recommendations, because I think they recognize that we've got to really focus on and understand this particular population if we're actually going to make a difference in how we deliver healthcare in this country. So I'm delighted to talk about this today with this panel. We have Gretchen Alkema here, who is the Vice President of Public Policy and Communications at the SCAN Foundation. Cindy Mann, who is a partner at Manat and the former director of the Center for Medicaid. And Sheila Burke, who is a BPC fellow and a strategic advisor at Baker Donaldson. So really glad to have them here. So I want to start first by, so the name of the report is a policy roadmap for individuals' complex care needs, but I thought to myself, what are complex care needs, you might be wondering. So let me just ask first and foremost, who are the people, can you guys talk a little bit about who are the people who have complex care needs? And Gretchen, we'll just kind of go down the row and then mix it up.
Certainly. I think you've given a great founding stat, and about the 10% of Medicare beneficiaries with 60% of the costs. That's the easiest way, I think, to think about it from a macro perspective. But this is really about folks who have multiple chronic health conditions and the challenges with daily living that are about bathing, dressing, transferring, meal preparation, all the things, frankly, that we all probably took for granted waking up in the morning, and how, you know, the challenges that people face in meeting those basic daily activities in order to live life in a way that is meaningful to them and their own lives and their families. This could also include behavioral health conditions, which add to the level of complexity, cognitive impairment and dementia of all sorts of forms. So looking at, you know, this isn't just about what's the ICD-9 or 10 code on the chart. It really is about how people are living every day, and how that interaction occurs between one's healthcare state that's on that chart and what it looks like to live in a way that is filled with dignity and independence. So, I mean, you two have seen it also in lots of different ways, and the impact of those functional challenges that have on people's lives, their lives of their caregivers, the lives of their health systems. Anything you want to add?
Sure. First of all, I want to thank BPC for continuing to do the important work on this topic. It is profoundly important, and increasingly so, certainly as the population ages and as people with disabilities happily are living longer and able to function, but need often the ability to function in terms of work and broader community, but need often to have the supports. So first, let me note, because you may be wondering why the former director of Medicaid is here, these are not just Medicare beneficiaries, but they are largely dual beneficiaries. So 30% of Medicaid spending is on Medicare beneficiaries who are also eligible for Medicaid. 30% of all Medicaid dollars. So it often gets lost because people think of people with complex healthcare needs, particularly to the extent that they're the elderly, as being a Medicare population. But when they are low income and people with multiple complex healthcare needs are almost always going to eventually be low income, because they will have such extraordinary medical and long-term care costs. Medicaid pays for most of the long-term care part of it, but also some of the behavioral health and other wraparound services. In terms of the population, I think the most striking part of it, and it's part of the challenge of thinking about good policies, is that it's a very heterogeneous group, right? It can include people with brain injuries. It can include the very frail 87-year-old. It can include a 50-year-old who's been working all her life and now has, you know, significant back problems, disability, diabetes, heart problems, multiple chronic conditions. It can include the 6-month-old who is on a ventilator and who needs tube feeding. So part of the challenges for providers, for states, for health plans, and most importantly for families, is to figure out and navigate the system to find out the right resources and the right avenues given the particular needs of the individual that we're talking about.
Thank you, and thank you to Ann, and thank you to BPC. I can't help but observe the fact that the panel is made up of women entirely. And one of the things that I think we have to keep in mind is who bears the burden in many cases of the care that needs to be provided to family members. And in many cases, it is in fact women. Who host a whole series of issues and challenges. So I think it is particularly appropriate that we all gather here before you. I would also observe, looking out at the audience, that some of you are going to be in need of long-term care. A fairly good percentage of you are going to need long-term care, or a member of your family are going to need long-term care. Building on Cindy's point, the fact is that they are not all the same. They are all very different in terms of their needs, very different in terms of their challenges, and very different in terms of the resources they have available to essentially support their needs, whether it's a family member, which is often the case, and often the woman, either as a mother or as a daughter, in terms of caring for that family member. So that's the first thing. They are not, in fact, the same. They are very heterogeneous. Two, they are not, as Cindy points out, all old. It isn't simply a Medicare population or even a dual population. It is a host of different circumstances that present those challenges to people. And so the challenge for us is figuring out what are the solutions that meet those varying needs and those varying resource assets that have available to people in terms of solving this problem. They are complex. They have multiple conditions that are either cognitive in nature or physical in nature, or in many cases, both. Physical and mental impairment. So the challenges in managing that population are not through traditional siloed-based healthcare services that our traditional Medicare system, or Medicaid in some cases, was built on. It is a system that now demands a different mix of services, which historically we have not viewed as healthcare services, but are critically important to allowing people to stay at home or to stay in their community and draw on the resources they have available. So in the course of our conversation today, I think it is that complexity, it is the challenge of that different population and their different resources. As Cindy points out, many will in fact spend down to Medicaid, many will impoverish themselves as a result of these services. This is not a Palm Beach crowd. This is in many instances a crowd that is dependent upon public services or the services of their family to essentially allow them to stay functional or to allow them to stay in their home. So it is a different population, it is not a high-income population, and the characteristics of them are enormously different, from the very young to the very old.
Yeah, great. Now, so you made a point that I want to have an additional conversation about, which is that the system that they encounter is siloed. So the way that the healthcare system and the long-term care system have evolved to this point in time is not at all set up in a way that's going to serve the needs of this population. And I'd like to just talk a little bit more about that. What is it about the system that makes it ill-prepared to serve this very heterogeneous, very diverse population that has these ongoing needs over long periods of time? And I'd love to hear your thoughts a little bit more so that everybody understands exactly what it is that we're trying to solve for.
Well, I'll go ahead and start and say that, by and large, we have a healthcare system and, frankly, also a long-term care system that is set up to look at one aspect of an individual's life. The healthcare looks at what's the diagnosis, what's the prevailing diagnosis, what's the major symptom cluster that's happening to an individual at this one time, and then seeks to do a care pathway, a treatment pathway based on that one thing. And I think what we've already laid out is it's never really one thing. I mean, the idea of complexity is that there's lots of forces that are happening in a person's life, and one thing may be prevailing at that point than another. But if you're standing in front of the endocrinologist, diabetes is the discussion of the moment, and that may not be what's really driving the challenges that person is having. It just, one sees that part of the balloon. If you're squeezing the balloon and the diabetes part starts to blow up, it's easy to say, oh my God, we got to get hemoglobin A1C handled. Got to get that person, got to get the labs, got to keep checking it, got to, manage that sugar. And we're also dealing with somebody who has cognitive impairment, who's at risk for falling, has all these other aspects of their complexity, and one has to stop and think, is the most important thing right now, the most person-centered thing right now, to manage that blood sugar? Maybe it is, but until you ask the person what really matters to them, what really matters to that caregiver in light of all that's happening in a person's life, that's an assumption set of saying we got to get the diabetes under control. And it can really create chaos in people's lives if all you're doing is focusing on that one piece, as opposed to the collection of what is happening in a person's life, but more importantly, what matters to them in light and in spite of that collection of disease states, conditions, and worries, frankly, that the system will often focus on. So, and we do that in long-term care as well. We do that of saying you need assisted living, you need this kind of care, you need home-delivered meals, you need this, that, and the other thing. And the truth is one person could need many of those, they could only need one of those. But we really don't know until we ask a person what matters to them, what's the most important goal that they have in their life today, and how do you reorient care that's focused on goals as opposed to focused on this myriad of clusters, one size fits all for anything that's happening in a person's life medically.
Right.
And just building on that point, we have historically thought about healthcare as an episode, that there's a beginning and there's an end. And I think what we found over time, that's certainly how Medicare was designed. There's a beginning, and we all talked about episodes and the deductible per episode, 90-day. The reality is today, because people are living longer, because they're living with more disparate conditions, there is no beginning and end. There is a whole series of things that occur and transitions that occur during that period of time. And the needs vary during that period of time. We also know now, more than we did in the past, that the needs are not necessarily traditional health care. I mean, what was just mentioned in terms of whether it's nutrition services, whether it's housing related, that is the ability of someone to stay in a home or in some kind of a physical facility. And we have not, in terms of healthcare and the financing of healthcare, particularly on the Medicare side, thought beyond the traditional hospital, things that occur in boxes, things that occur when people are having things done to them, rather than the support they need in order to retain essentially their stability or whatever it happens to be. So I think it is all of those things that contribute. It is the episodic nature of it, but it occurs over a long period of time, no clear beginning and end, transitions that occur during those periods of time, the needs that change during those those periods of time. All of those things make it enormously complicated in a financing system that has purchased a thing, a unit of service. And that's not the case. Medicaid has been somewhat better, and Cindy knows better than any of us, in terms of recognizing the community-based services that are needed. But that came late to the game. But they've always been willing to pay for some transportation, some of those other services. Medicare never has. But again, overall, the systems have not adjusted to the reality of what these folks need.
I could I think there's really three points I'd like to make as to how the system is really not designed to meet people's needs. One, I think, is exactly Gretchen's point, is it's really not very patient-centered. And we talk about it, and there's been progress in that regard, but it's really not embedded in a significant way. Let me give you an example of somebody who was a patient of somebody at the Camden Coalition, and she was being treated. She had significant rashes that were very uncomfortable, and she kept going in for visits, dermatology, this one, that one. She had multiple testing. Nobody could quite figure out what it was. Lots of expenditures in our healthcare system. Rash was not resolved. Woman was very concerned. She was working and at risk of losing her employment. And when finally there was a really authentic conversation, it turned with trust. It turned out that her job was as a house cleaner. That she used multiple cleaning products. Thank you. And it wasn't just the cleaning products, but in conversation, she would go home every night and feel like she had to scrub, and she'd spend like 5 hours scrubbing her skin. And so what became clear is that also she had mental health issues, and it began to come out the comorbidities that were going on, and on the path that had been taken, which was a very expensive path and a very time-consuming path for her, was totally off. but because there wasn't that conversation. It was, let me look at your rash. The other issue is integration. So we've talked a lot around healthcare delivery system reform around integration. You talk to a lot of health plans, states, providers, and they're feeling excited if there's integration between primary care and specialists, primary care and physical health and behavioral health. And if you ever say, what's going on with long-term care? They look like that's a foreign land, right? We have begun to have some integration between those two systems, but historically and still really today, they are very siloed and very separate. And then finally, I also want to just refer to exactly what Sheila was saying, which is that it's really the panoply of services that people need. If we want to help that diabetic patient, but we find out that the utilities are cut off in their house, right? And they can't keep food safe and available, or they can't prepare meals at all, then no matter what happens, there's just not going to be the ability to be able to move forward. So it's both the long-term care in the traditional sense, the physical and mental health care that need to be integrated, but also really thinking about what have been starting to be called the social determinants of health.
Right. No, thank you. I think to some extent our fee-for-service system is as important as it's been in providing this core set of protections has sort of hit its limit in terms of what it can do for people in these kinds of complex situations. And we had a daughterhood reader who wrote in because her dad had gout, and he had been first and foremost, he was hospitalized for gout, which sort of set off this entire cascade of problems. But one of them was that after being hospitalized, he got C. difficile for his hospitalization. Then he had to go back to a skilled nursing facility. He went back to the hospital, so rehospitalization, then a skilled nursing facility for 20 days. Then home. He gets home. He's in really bad shape. And the daughter calls the physician to get home health prescribed. And the physician says, I can't prescribe. You can't have home health because I have to have a face-to-face meet. The regulations say I have to have a face-to-face meeting with you. And I understand as a former budget person why the face-to-face requirement is in place. But and I think the physician was probably wrong about whether or not he could prescribe it. He wasn't understanding the regulation. But at some point, someone needs to be able to kind of coordinate and navigate on behalf of that family and make all of these services come together on their behalf, and that's what's missing. Yeah.
We have amazing tactics in healthcare.
Yeah.
We have amazing tactics in long-term care.
Right.
But this is about strategy.
Right.
People who are coming in with complex health, long-term care needs,
right.
It is about what's the strategy to meet that person's goals and needs within the context of their life. And we can throw a million tactics at people, but that doesn't mean that it matches what the strategy is. And sometimes we overdo, sometimes we way underdo. But if we don't ask about what the strategy is, we don't craft a strategy in that person's life with them as they're driving it through their needs, values, and preferences, which by and large, people act on that anyway. Whether we talk about what their needs are, people respond based on what their needs are and what their desires are. We can just do better to say, let's get to a strategic place of engaging in health and long-term care tactics that matches what I want and what I need from my own life and what resources I have in my support world. It may be the Palm Beach crowd, but if they don't have any kids who can help them effectuate it, or they've pissed off everybody in their life and nobody wants to be around them, it makes it really hard to execute that strategy in a meaningful way. No, but that's just one. That's one element we never really think about. Is who are the supports in people's lives that really help execute those kinds of plans and are frankly the strategy makers by default without really understanding all the range of the tactics.
Right.
Well, one of the things we don't do, and until recently we didn't encourage the financing systems to support, is that kind of planning. That is to think in advance of what your strategies will be and who needs to be involved in those decisions and how one engages the family. We're also terrible at handoffs. Whether it's from the hospital to the home health agency or to the skilled nursing facility or back and forth, so that one, the family's not informed and not part of the conversation. Secondly, we don't essentially reimburse or recognize the time that needs to be spent in order to do that, and we don't do the kind of handoffs that provide the information to the different systems about what this person needs and, frankly, what they want, what their preferences are. We don't document it well, and we don't hand off.
So I'm just going to jump in here because I can imagine a policymaker might be listening to us right now and thinking, somebody who knows something about healthcare and thinking, well, we're on it, right? We're implementing value-based care. We are implementing demonstration programs to integrate care for dual eligibles. We've got ACOs and bundled payments, and managed care is growing, and all of that kind of stuff. So, is that ultimately going to get us where we need to go? Or do you feel like, not to put you on the spot, but do you feel like some of those efforts are falling short, and how could they be improved? And I think that's a lot of what the BPC has been addressing in their report, but I'd love to hear your views on that.
You need to pick up the report and read the recommendations, or one of the 5 reports that preceded this summary of all of the reports. There are very specific steps in terms of Medicare regulations, in terms of financing, in terms of the reimbursement structures. Value-based insurance or value-based care is great. ACOs, whatever it happens to be, are great only if you fully understand and appreciate what those things need to do. We still think in a traditional curative model rather than the kind of social determinants of care and the kind of contributors. And I think the report lays out a very specific set of issues, whether it's in demonstration authority, whether it's in supporting the states and looking at Medicaid and the waiver authorities, that need to be done in order to achieve some of these results.
So there's a lot of activity at the state level. If for no other reason than prompted by the high cost of long-term care and people with complex health care needs, but also obviously states looking to improve outcomes. So we just worked on a report with the SCAN Foundation and Milbank Fund that's a toolkit for states on some of the flexibilities that they might be able to take advantage of in order to construct better long-term care support systems for people in their communities. And the report is taking really the lessons from some of the leader states and trying to make it easier for some of the states that aren't quite in that place to begin to take up some of these opportunities. And there's a lot of, let me give you a couple of examples of the 2 big areas focused on in the toolkit is around the rebalancing question. People call it rebalancing. We called it rebalancing in the toolkit. We've never been balanced. So I always need to point that out. Right, let's just get to balance, right? Balance between the right balance between institutional care and home and community-based care. So lots of really interesting things, and one of for example, Massachusetts has a one-stop. So you're not assessed over here for assisted living, or over here for nursing home, or over here for a home and community-based waiver eligibility. You are assessed based on your needs and where you are and what's the best situation for you. And then that's the strategy, right? And then the tactic is to be put into place. That seems very logical, but that's an exception. That's a best practice. That's not the rule. In part, there's because of financing arrangements that are built into the Medicaid program that put institutional care first, right? And home and community-based services are optional and often subject to financing caps. So I also need to say, in terms of what needs to be done as policymakers, is we just had a very engaging, shall we say, debate in 2017 about repeal and replace, which included proposals to put caps on Medicaid funding. And very seldom, if ever, did I hear it discussed that cap would have affected these complex care needs people. That 1/3 of Medicaid spending is for those individuals that and if we see a squeeze from the federal government in terms of the resources that states have available, we will inevitably see the outlier costs jettisoned as states try and stay within those caps. And unfortunately, the people we're talking about today are the outlier costs people.
Right, yeah, just almost by definition there, right, exactly. So I just want to, we have 5 more minutes for discussion with this panel, and then we're going to open it up for everyone in the audience to ask some questions before we move on to the next. When I don't want us to end without talking about long-term care financing, because I think Cindy's making a really important point. A third of all Medicaid spending is on long-term care, and that's going to grow as the population that needs long-term care grows very soon. So you two have been, I'm looking at Sheila and Gretchen in particular, have been a witness to so many different efforts on the part of a wide variety of policy groups to tackle long-term care financing. And I think we'd have a whole panel on why it's hard. But so many reasons. But maybe talk a little bit why it's not something we talk about very much, I think, in the broader policy conversation. Why is it important? And maybe just touch on a little bit of what the BPC is suggesting in their report, not to go into a lot of detail, and just your views about, again, why it's so important.
Sure. I mean, there's been discussion about the need for long-term care financing for, frankly, all of us in the room who are working today and want to have supports and services for ourselves in the future because we know what the risk factor is of the likelihood of that event. And, obviously, we're really pleased for the SCAM Foundation that the BPC has continued to trudge along this road with great policy work, bringing lots of people together. So thankful for the Long-Term Care Financing Collaborative, for Leading Age and all of their efforts, and all these pieces of the conversation that can keep moving along together in order to say we can't give up on this issue. We need to look at Medicare and Medicaid today and how they work well together, and we also need to think about and plan for the future. So this is obviously a difficult conversation, made much more difficult, I think, by virtue of the discussions of about per capita cap and block granting discussions that happened in the fall, particularly. There are commissioners from the Long-Term Care Commission who are in this room who walked this road along with us here at the SCAN Foundation. And there was always a consideration that there would be folks who would be able to be supported by a safety net program. There would always be people who would be able to self-insure. And then there's this other group that lives in the middle in various parameters. But there's a tenuous balance between all of those three parts. And so, without any kind of vision, set point, continued path towards long-term care financing, frankly, it ends up on the shoulders of individuals and families and who are in, frankly, the worst position to be able to address that, whether it's financially, emotionally, or frankly, practically. And so there's a lot of different recommendations. Again, nice summary in this report of all the kind of work that touches on the healthcare side, the care transitions, kind of care coordination piece that Sheila talked about, and the long-term care financing side. And we're going to have a great, robust discussion about one of those options here in just a moment. So, Sheila, your thoughts?
In my remaining 2 minutes, why is it hard? I think it is at the heart of the matter an issue around money. It's always around money. At the heart of the matter is the question of responsibility and the share between the states and the feds and the individuals, and where that burden ought to be best borne, what that combination of things might be. When you raise the question of new entitlements, people get naturally anxious about whether or not the current system would support a new entitlement program. There are questions about why people don't anticipate it, why people don't save, why doesn't a 30-year-old start buying, private long-term care insurance? Does the market essentially support those choices? And we know the long-term care market has in fact failed in that respect and is a take-up by very few people. So one wonders why that's the case. So I think it is all of those things that complicate the question. Who is it for? How do you prepare for it? How it should be financed? When do you need it? When you don't want to buy it is when you're 72. When you want to begin thinking about it is when you are far younger, but there are a whole lot of other competing demands at that point in time, which we know. So should we use the employment system, which has been a tremendous opportunity on the health side? We know employment-based insurance, the basis upon which much of insurance is provided today, for the moment, is one that has been quite successful post-World War II. What we've never done is looked at what, in fact, the alternative is with respect to the long-term care piece of this. How long, How much? Is it a per diem amount that you pay somebody? Is it a service that you want to buy for someone? What the nature of the construction of the financing system might be. And so I think all of those things, the Long-Term Care Commission struggled long and hard over what is it you're buying, for whom, over what period of time, financed in what fashion. And there are many veterans of that conversation and all the others. And I think in the following panel with Mark and Judy and others, there is nobody that knows more about this topic than they do in terms of what the alternatives have been. But I think it is the sheer complexity of the question and the real deep divisions in terms of where the burden ought to fall in terms of how it's structured and financed.
That's perfect. Do you want to?
Just want to end with a positive note.
And on a positive note.
This is such an important issue, and it's only getting more acute, to pardon the bad metaphor. As our population is aging, as people are living longer, as people become more frail in their post 85 versus post 70, the efforts of this report and related efforts really important both for the particular proposals, but also to keep this issue front and center. And it's really, really important because, either people don't focus on it or they want to just run away from it because it feels very complex. The optimistic note is, I wouldn't say nobody thought. Long time people thought putting a drug benefit into Medicare, the new entitlement, was impossible to do. People can debate about, how it was done and whatever, but we have a drug benefit in the Medicare program. We have no long-term care benefit in the Medicaid program, a real long-term care benefit in the Medicare program. Now, whether it's Medicare or whether it's through private insurance or through a combination of the others, we do every now and then in this country have the capacity to step back and say, let's do something really important and really bold, and we've just got to do it. It affects everybody in this country.
That's great. Great. So, thank you. So let's open it up for some questions, and I want to just ask the people who ask questions to remember we're going to have a whole panel on long-term care financing. So if you want to maybe save the long-term care financing questions for Judy and Mark, we'll have an opportunity to talk more about that. So, okay, right here.
Yeah, hi, Neil Newberger from Health Tech Strategies, and Sheila hit on it when she said we need to document strategies and care and that kind of thing. What I see missing from the report, and without overstating it, is the need for a long-term, longitudinal care record that is lifelong, transportable, portable, secure, continually follows the patient. And again, not to say technology is going to be the answer by any stretch of the imagination, but that's at least a small part of it in terms of documenting what's going on.
Yeah. No, I've gained a new appreciation for that recently working with some senior housing providers and their challenges of just trying to keep track of the kinds of information they all need to have over that person's, and that's just not their lifetime, that's just a smaller span of time, but it's very hard. Thank you for that.
Michael Cook, I'm a healthcare lawyer, but also on the Medicaid board in Virginia. By the way, I'm just going to put a pitch in for the fact that they've got some extraordinary people down there, much to my surprise when I got on there. Well, I used to bring Bourne Amendment suits against states, so.
As a Virginian, I feel I need to comment on that. And, Judy's the same, but carry on.
Anyway, in all seriousness, they do an extraordinary job with very little. One of the things that I guess I've been interested in is the social determinants. And are there any states that actually do a good job of perhaps pulling TANF benefits, SNAP benefits together with health care benefits so that people have adequate food, and look at some of those determinants? And also, how do you get the Milbank Report?
And the scam report. Great. Well, let me start with that, since Manette doesn't really have a website that has the publications. Our colleagues working on it were at Center for Healthcare Strategies, so look on their website and you'll find the report, the toolkit. The issue of I'm sorry, TANF. You know what?
stamps,
a lot of states are working on that. Some health plans are working on that. I'd say Oregon is fairly far ahead in thinking about that integration. Part of it is a systems issue. Medicaid and Medicare are often in a different world these days than TANF and food stamps, and so linking that back up. So I think those are the easier ones for states and health plans to figure out how to link people to. I think more challenging are things like housing and housing supports and transportation, for which there's not a dedicated funding source. And so the work now is really to I'd be able to identify what are the opportunities for bringing down different financing streams and bring them together so that the system can operate around a person-centered plan in a more effective way. But there's pockets of really interesting work on this going on in different parts of the country. And I think over the next couple of years, we're actually going to see leaps and bounds, some movement forward around that.
You raise a very important point, and I think it is one that historically has been a serious issue, and that is the disconnect between the different sources of financing for different things, whether it's for SNAP or whether it's for housing or whatever it happens to be. But even in the context of Medicare and Medicaid, one of the issues that the report takes on is the question of varying eligibility for services within the two programs. Even if we were able to consolidate and in some way regularize the questions that are asked and the circumstances under which people qualify for anything as simple as DME to home health between the two big financing programs. And that's one of the things that we've identified that needs real attention between the agencies is, if you walk in and present yourself with a set of circumstances, why wouldn't that qualify you for the same set of services for both of the programs that ought to be coordinating? So we ought to begin at least there, but your broader question is a much tougher one. It requires the Ag Department to talk to HHS, which is challenging, shall I say, as the staff person for the father of food stamps.
And as one of the people who was at HHS many years ago, a general counsel,
yes,
who went nuts trying to get the two
to talk.
IRS to talk with.
Oh yeah, then there's the Treasury.
What I hear you talking about is, how can the big system level players, the thought of Ag and HHS getting together, it's like, oh my gosh, that's awesome, and it frightens me. It's because it's so hard in so many ways, and they speak such different languages. How do you get the system level players to think about that vision and strategy about what it is that we're trying to achieve in addressing people's social determinants of health, using the language of the day? And then where's the delivery system players in that in their own right? Given that, lots of folks don't know that it's their responsibility in terms of providing nutrition, but that doesn't mean that they can't ask about it and help make a connection to what maybe the nutrition providers are in their community, which means you got to ask. You got to ask me as the consumer about what my needs, values, and preferences are in an organized, standardized way, and ask that across points in time so that you know what my needs are and can help respond to those needs, even if it's not going to be in the context of the particular Medicare or Medicaid benefit. But we've railed against any kind of universal, standardized consistency assessment in this country, and that's a real challenge. There's always been that opportunity within the health risk assessment inside of Medicare, which a lot of the duals plans are using too, but every single one gets to do its own thing, and there's no kind of common core about here's what you should at least be asking of people, and we can do better on that. It's fascinating. I went to go get a mammogram the other day, and they immediately gave me this iPad, and they asked me all these questions about, what BRCA gene and this and that and the other thing, and I didn't understand half of them, but I knew enough to say no, and I handed it back, and he plugged that right into the computer, and that all loaded up inside of my electronic health record. And why couldn't they do that by saying, how did you get here? Did you need transportation to get here today? Right. Have you been, is your nutrition needs met? Is this met? Just the real core 10 question basics. Right. We can do better on that at every level inside the system. But we have to have a vision and a strategy and a consciousness around that. Do you need care support?
Right.
Basic stuff.
Exactly.
I will say that there are sometimes conversations with USDA, with agriculture, and with HUD. I just want to note Henry Claypool is here, and when he was in the administration last time around, did a lot of work really bringing those different departments together, and particularly thinking about what are the housing services that can be done. And of course, a lot of this is very state and local too. So it's not easy. Medicaid agencies often don't talk to their housing authorities and their agencies, but those conversations are underway in lots of different places, and I think we can make some real advances.
Okay, I have one more question. Shauna since I know her, I'm gonna.
Shauna Cost on Care. It still feels like an awfully medicalized traditional model, and we're all talking about social determinants of health. And a book, Medicaring Communities, which really talks about, we are so underfunded on the social determinants of health, AAAs, and the infrastructure that would support the individual. So I guess I'm wondering, where does that more cost-effective community-based delivery model that shifts funding to those critical supports sit in the set of recommendations?
So I'm going to take that facilitator's prerogative and just kind of, because I have 7 seconds to answer that question. Yeah. So the report there is a body of work within this roadmap about how to very similar to the work that Dr. Lynn has done on Medicaring, that kind of that has recommended a number of different ways that the CMS can make the funding sources more flexible, so that organizations that want to create PACE-like or hub-like structures and integrate everything within those structures will actually have the ability to do it, because right now under the Medicare Advantage program it is impossible, and so that program is essentially kind of hijacked by big insurers. And so if we want providers to have the ability to use that program, not just PACE, but to use Medicare Advantage, to use the Special Needs Plans authorities, or even to use the ACO program, demonstration program, to create something that looks like that centralized function that Cindy was talking about, that you're talking about, where the delivery system actually works, they're going to have more flexibility at the provider level in order to do that. So, there are recommendations in one of the reports. So thank you for that question. And on that note, let's thank the panel very much for their really great. So we're just star-studded panels, one right after another here. So I'm really fortunate. We're gonna pivot a little bit right now and talk more about long-term care financing. And I just want to commend the BPC for creating a platform for us to have this discussion and being brave enough to do that, because there's so few opportunities to do it in this current climate. So the BPC has a number of recommendations in their report about to improve the private long-term care insurance market, to make it more affordable, to make it more available, to create products that people will hopefully be able to buy through their employer, using a number of different flexible mechanisms, personal finance mechanisms. But I think they recognize that is just going to only address sort of one part of the problem, which is the kind of the initial risk for long-term care, and it's not necessarily going to cover everybody. And so the research that we've recently done, that was funded by Leading Age, the SCAN Foundation, and AARP at the Urban Institute, showed us that about half of all people who are turning 65 tomorrow are going to have some need for, we're going to have a need for 2 or more activities of daily living, supports around 2 or more activities of daily living, which means they're going to need support for, help with bathing or dressing or eating or transferring or something really basic, 2 or more of those. But what was real, I think the thing about that report that just really struck me and has stayed with me is that of those people, of that 50%, 25% are going to need that level of assistance for 5 or more years. And that's where we're seeing, a lot of the costs in the system occur. And that the private long-term care insurance products, as great as they are really not designed, or no longer that market can no longer really sort of support the coverage of people's needs that when they extend throughout their lifetime over a really long period of time like that. So So what the BPC has done is asked Mark and Judy to come and talk about their proposal, their idea to create a federal kind of backstop or a federal social insurance program that would complement private insurance that would cover a larger number of, provide coverage for a lot of people who have short-term need, but for that smaller group of people who have much longer, through what we call long catastrophic, we use the word catastrophic, but it's really just a long period of need that often can be very expensive. What can we do for them, and what's the right approach for them? So I'm really fortunate to have Mark Cohen and Judy Fader, who practically need no introduction, but I'll do it anyway. Mark Cohen, especially because Mark is in a new role now. He is the professor of gerontology at the McCormick Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Massachusetts at Boston. So we're very excited to have him. He's also the research director at the Center for Consumer Engagement and Health Transformation at Community Catalyst. So welcome. And Judy Fader is a professor of public policy at Georgetown University. So very excited to have both of you here and talking about this idea. And so we've seen a number of long-term care financing proposals put forward over the years. And I've given a little bit of an outline of what you're going to talk about, which is this social insurance program that covers people who have long stays. But what motivated you to work on this proposal or this idea in particular? So Mark, I'll let you start.
Thanks, Ann. Thank you very much. Thanks very much to BPC for organizing and hosting this, and the SCAN Foundation for its support. As I was thinking about today, I also want to acknowledge the passing of a colleague and good friend, Josh Wiener, really a giant in this field, who, with many of us, have trudged for many years in this area. And while Josh and I often found ourselves on different sides of the debate, we, I think, fundamentally agreed on one important principle, which is that this type of risk, the fundamental problem with long-term care financing, is that there's an absence of an effective, comprehensive insurance solution. Now, why do I harp on insurance? The main reason, and Ann alluded to it, is that this risk is very skewed. Many people will not need significant help. There's a group of people that will need a good amount of help, and then there's this small group that needs a lot of help. And that means it is a perfect candidate for risk pooling through insurance. And what happens when that insurance mechanism is not here? It means that family has to bear the burden of that care. Sometimes, or oftentimes, people go without care. And as already been alluded to, people often have to impoverish themselves, spend down their income and assets in order to access the major public payer, which is the Medicaid program. And what you end up with is a system that creates a lot of burdens on families, high levels of reported unmet need among the population with significant need, and significant challenges on state budgets. And unfortunately, the private market has underperformed in this regard. Many carriers, for a variety of reasons, have left the market. Many products have become less affordable to middle-income elders. And carriers are really no longer willing to accept this catastrophic risk. So when you put all these pieces together, what we come up with is a classic market failure. And that oftentimes argues for some type of government intervention, and especially as it relates to this catastrophic risk that we're talking about. And because we believe that there's a very important and significant role for private insurance to play in this market, we put forward a specific set of actions very much in line with the BPC recommendations about how to spur early planning, personal responsibility, and greater take-up of private insurance in the private insurance sector along with this public benefit. And Judy, you may want to add on
Sure, and I would pick up on the nature and the diversity of the risk that people face, and the statistics that you gave. I sometimes give in another fashion, which is to say that half of people who turn age 65 today are going to die without needing any long-term care at all. You might consider those the lucky ones, as long as it's late, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I miss Josh. He left too soon. So they will never need long-term care, and about 12% are going to need care for 5 years or more. So as Mark said, that it's a diversity of risk, and which reflects the fact that it's an unpredictable catastrophic risk, and that's why we talk about insurance. The 50% number is, I think, it sometimes leads to a misperception. We hear a great deal about how, hey, we're all going to get old, we're going to need care, and so we ought to prepare. Well, you can't prepare. Good luck, exactly. A longtime colleague once said, yeah, prepare to get screwed. Because there ain't nothing out there for you. So, excuse me, audience. It is, you can't prepare for this kind of situation. And a good reminder that how much, 40% of the people who need long-term care today are under the age of 65. We understand that those people can't prepare, but neither can older people because it is both inefficient and pretty much impossible to prepare for that kind of risk. So in recognizing this admonition to prepare, and that seems to be a value tied in with personal responsibility that's quite prevalent, we thought about designing an approach that enables people to prepare. And people can take on this responsibility. Families take on responsibility, but it's too much. They need help too. We need to insure them against catastrophic risk as well. And we thought about what kind of combination of public and private support, a meaningful insurance program could make that possible, preparation possible, but with appropriate community role as well as personal role. And then we were pleased to see the BPC, the collaborative that was mentioned. SCAN's been involved in a lot of these efforts to see Leading Age, that there is a growing recognition that people can't do this on their own, the private sector can't do this on their own, and so that some combination is the best way to go.
Got it.
Just to build on that, at the end of the day, you have the private insurance industry unwilling to take this risk. That's really important to note, and it's in part because it's very difficult to price in a voluntary insurance market. It was not for lack of an effort, very difficult, and when you think about it, what we're proposing is actually in line with similar approaches in health and income security public policies, where the public sector will provide a defined, sometimes floor or benefit that the private market builds off of, like Medicare, public Medicare, private Medigap insurance policies to cover certain gaps, public Social Security, private pensions to cover, and so on. So it's not out of step with the way that we seem to do things in this country.
Can I ask just a quick question, which...
Maybe we could put the proposal up also, the first slide.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So what do you say to people who say, well, we already have a catastrophic program, it's Medicaid? What is the problem with using Medicaid in that manner?
So I'm actually going to quote you in answering that question. If you think about Medicaid as an insurance program, which we don't often think about it in that way, it is an insurance program with an infinite deductible. Right? So the fact is that you give up everything to get Medicaid, and pretty much everything. And that is not a protection against catastrophe. The way I approach it is to say that Medicaid is enormously valuable, but it's only there after catastrophe, certainly financial catastrophe, has happened. So we don't have a means to really protect people, both from impoverishment and in order to get the care that they need when they're not in those circumstances. There's a lot of discussion in the earlier excellent panel about dual eligibles. Well, it's your statistic, Ann. I think it's somewhere about half of the people, of the Medicare beneficiaries who need long-term care are not dual eligible. And that does not mean that they're rich. A lot of discussion about Palm Beach. I am a Palm Beach girl. I don't know that you had me in mind, but I am. A lot of variation in Palm Beach as well, right? So it is, but there's a large population that is not addressed by Medicaid.
Right.
There's another reason also, I think, which is that typically Medicaid is subject to variations in funding levels and state policy. And that's the whole notion here of moving to an insurance-based system where you're paying into something and you expect to get some level of benefit back. And there's a relationship between what you pay in and what you get back. Very important distinction.
Right, exactly. So I just want to make sure, I'm going to suggest maybe we move on to the structure of the proposal and make sure we give everybody in the audience a sense of what we've been talking about. Because you've defined, so how do you create a benefit that is only for a certain period of time, that's forever, but only after a certain period of time? Can you talk a little bit about how do you access this particular, in your proposal, how you would access this benefit?
Sure. I mean, the basic idea is that we have a waiting period, and before a public program will kick in. So there is some upfront liability, and the question is, how do you define a catastrophe, and on what basis do you define these waiting periods? And we did it in two ways. Because we recognize that catastrophe, given the variation across the population, catastrophe differs depending on who you are, and most significantly, depending on your level of income. So we looked both at people's financial capacity to pay for private insurance to fill that gap, as well as their financial ability to shoulder the burden. So the way we've defined it is to look at an income-based waiting period that can vary between 1 year and 4 years. And I mean, frankly, if you're looking to encourage personal responsibility and greater take-up of private insurance, and that is what our ultimate objective is here, you have to consider what can people actually do. So think of it this way. The waiting period would be longer for people with higher income and shorter for people with lower income. And the other side of the coin is that for those people with lower incomes that have shorter waiting periods, they would be able to afford policies because they wouldn't need as much coverage. And we tried to key it based on current market trends. So across all of the income groups, what we're looking at is people not spending more than 2 to 4% of their income on a private policy. So that's the basic idea in terms of the waiting period. And notice also we didn't say that people had to expend a certain amount of money before receiving the benefit. In fact, it's a time-based period because we wanted to recognize the fact that many people are going to require depending solely on family and friends.
Yeah. So you have this period of time, let's say you're in that 12% or the 25% of the 50%, which is a more confusing way of saying it. And
I'm just glad it adds up. I thought about it.
And you get through your waiting period, let's say based on your circumstances, is 2 years, and 2 years is up. Then what's the benefit? How do you define the benefit at that point?
Right, and I wanted to just add just one thing to what Mark said earlier, that when we were looking for a waiting period that would make the purchase of private long-term care insurance affordable. That 2 to 4% worked for everybody except the people in the lowest quintile of the income distribution, the lowest 20%. So we are really, this proposal would not aim for the Medicaid population, although you'll see it has consequences because of spend down and for other reasons. But it is that, for that population, they can't do that. But we leave room to rely on family care as well, which is what most people rely on today.
Anyway,
exactly.
Yep.
So, and it does provide them then some insurance. So now to your question on the benefit. Bill Hoagland may not notice it, but I always have him in mind. That's it. No, that's there. So we, the benefit that we propose is modest. It is explicitly geared to support at home. Because we believe from lots of evidence and experience that that is where people want to stay. You can use the benefit toward nursing home care, as we would put it forward, but it's defined to provide home care. And so we set the benefit at 5 hours a day of home care. For those who followed class, it's a more generous benefit than class provided, would have provided. It is, Mark tells me, based on his work, that it is the average of what people with private long-term care insurance are using. We also, again, following what we hear from the community as to what people want, we also chose to we propose a benefit that is cash. That would enable considerable flexibility in what people are able to do with this benefit. This is because long-term care is so much about your living circumstances, you can use this money for lots of things, including support for your family caregiver. And there is a lot of that now in the Medicaid program. So those are the primary factors that guided our benefit design.
Let me add one thing for Bill and for others who are worried about cash and in the context of an insurance benefit and issues related to moral hazard. We think that has been eliminated to a large extent by the fact that we've got significant waiting periods, and it's not a voluntary insurance market. But we have thought a lot about that issue.
And I just want to, we don't have such limited time to cover a lot in this proposal. I just want to sort of, kind of back up what they're saying about it's my view that everything we were talking about in the previous panel about the flexibility of the delivery system and the need to improve the delivery system can only be supported by a cash benefit. If that a service-based benefit kind of basically bakes in a lot of the not inefficiencies, but sort of like things about our delivery system that we're not crazy about. So when people have money in their hands, what kind of innovations and in delivery models and delivery modalities would we see if everybody had access to actually that? Not to sound like a market capitalist.
We also want to recognize that there is, historically, there's a concern about giving out unconstrained cash, and so we don't want to skip over that. The fundamental premise that this is a family problem, not just an individual problem, although there are many individuals who don't have family supports. But that fundamental element of it makes that, to our way of thinking, less of a problem.
Yep. No, great. That's great. So let's talk about the financing of this.
Well, again,
so this has been great, and now we're done. No, let's talk about financing.
No, that's right.
All right, Judy.
I'll be goddamned if I don't get this done before I'm out of here. So I would thank you. It is important that one identify the potential payment sources, of which I would note there are many. But we thought about this problem, this program, this proposal, as similar to Medicare and Social Security, and so wanted to explicitly explore it as designed as contributory social insurance. insurance program. And to that end, we propose adding a tax to the Medicare tax that would begin at age 40. You know, thinking that too younger than that, people are not thinking about it. It was challenging to expect people to pay a tax at that age. So at age 40, consistent with the notion of preparing. We chose the Medicare tax because it applies not only to all wages, unlike Social Security. There's no cap on the Medicare payroll tax, and because it also applies now to unearned as well as earned income. So it is a particularly broad tax base. Because we are thinking of it as a contributory social insurance program, we followed the Medicare and Social Security model of requiring a minimum of 40 quarters of contributions. For Social Security, that requirement is modified for working age people with disabilities who don't work the 40 quarters. Although our proposal is significantly geared toward the older population, we believe it also can apply to much of the younger population. And our thinking is that at the time that people would begin to pay this tax, that the government would provide them an estimate of the gap they would have to fill at age 60 based on their projected earnings at age 65, whether a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, whatever the gap for. We went up to 5 or 4. We stopped 4. Thank you. Whatever the gap that they would know in advance. This is back to the prepare. Know what it is that you would have to fill in on your own, and in order to enable them to think about their responsibility as well as what the public program would provide.
So they become aware of this gap, and then presumably we have somewhat of a revitalized private insurance market that offers products that for people who want to and use it to fill that gap, they can do so. And the BPC report has recommendations, I think, that fit really nicely into that. But I know, Mark, you've done a lifetime of thinking about revitalizing or vitalizing the private insurance market. I was trying to think if there's another verb for vitalize.
Essentially, there are three things that are going on. If you look at all the recommendations, my own included, and BPC's when it relates to the private insurance market, you look at all the different recommendations, you put them into a framework. There are three objectives that we're trying to reach. A, how do you reduce the cost of products? I'm not going to go into all of that. You can read it, but how do you actually reduce the cost of products, make it more affordable, number one. Equally important, how do you change tastes for insurance so that every given level of price, more people are going to want to demand that product? And number three, how do you induce insurance carriers to back into the market to see that they can provide this insurance at a profitable price that's affordable to most people? Strip away everything. That's what we're really shooting for. And the idea is, especially as it relates to tastes, if people have a clear understanding of public and private roles, and they say, okay, public insurance is going to pay here. Well, if they're paying here, what's happening over here? Our belief is that is going to spur greater interest in the product and strategies for preparing.
No, that's great. So let's see, we have about 5 more minutes.
Do people want to know what it costs?
Yeah,
yes.
That's right.
And
that's
who
where
gets
I was
the
going.
benefits?
That's where I was going to
Had you in
slide
mind.
to.
And to our slide. Good.
Can we have the second slide that shows who's benefiting?
I can't see it. It's up? All right.
Okay.
That's where I was headed.
Okay. Sorry,
But I've
Ann.
lost control of this.
Sorry, Ann.
No, I'm kidding. I've only worked with Mark for 20 years. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, my turn. Here is appropriate that we acknowledge our co-author, Melissa Favreau at the Urban Institute, who you have worked with, not for 20 years, but has been part of the broad collaborative of efforts to think about a future financing. And the important thing here is that we wanted to put forward what would be the impact of this, it is the bars, yeah, good. Okay, it is that what would be the impact of a proposal like this on baseline spending? And we actually, Melissa, modeled two approaches to a catastrophic waiting period. One would be the one that we have proposed that would vary the length of the waiting period by income, shorter for lower income, longer for higher income people. And the other, which would be, frankly, simpler to administer, would be a flat, roughly 2-year waiting period. So it's the equivalent of the average you get from ours. So you're looking at similar money, but to look at the differences between them. If you look at the change from baseline, from what is projected under current law, you can see first that a catastrophic public program, and they're very similar. The two, regardless of the approach you use to waiting period, the catastrophic public program would inject significant new dollars for new services into the long-term care system. Mark mentioned, and we've not belabored, but the substantial evidence of unmet need, of family burden, so people not getting what they need and families killing themselves to give them what they can give them. So that you want to think about that as providing a stronger long-term care system or supports for the people who need care. Also important is that the program leads to a 15% reduction in the portion of long-term care funding that is coming from out-of-pocket spending. So that is obviously of greatest significance to the people who are spending the most and have the least means to do so. And then finally, not unimportant in terms of strengthening our capacity to deliver services to not only to people who are living longer by virtue of disability, but also to the growing elderly population. The baby boom generation, we turn 85 in 2031, just so you pay attention to the timing. If you look forward, this mitigates having a different funding source would mitigate burdens by reducing current Medicaid spending by almost a quarter. So a substantial offset to Medicaid spending.
Yeah, great.
We're getting to
do we only have 50 seconds left? So I have to say one thing then about the price tag.
No, I think let's do that, and then we'll go to questions, so we can go over a little bit.
I mean,
you want to go? You want to?
Fine.
Sure.
So what does the premium charge? You know, how much is this going to cost? Individuals. And the way we looked at it, it's funny, we did change our mind recently after the passage of the tax bill. Originally, we had thought that, all right, let's just, if this was an employee pay all tax, what would it look like? And it turns out that the actual premium charge is $486 per year, $41 per month. It's a 1 percentage point increase in the Social Security tax, and that's based on covered wages of $46,000, which means that it will actually be, or it would actually be less, because we were not able to take into account in the modeling the uncovered unearned income. If you split this, as we now believe you should, we think there may be some room on the corporate side. If you split this between the employees and the employer, what we're talking about is a direct cost to employees of $21 a month to pay for this sort of benefit. So that gives it a range of magnitude. And we had two estimates. This was actually the higher cost estimate that we received.
Oh, that's great. So I think what we're going to do, if it's okay with you guys.
Not much more than the cost of cable.
I feel like Larry Minix is about to talk about a cup of coffee.
If you're going to go to the audience, which I'm happy to, let me just say, from at least some people in the room, I heard great enthusiasm. I would hate to dampen that, but I want to be clear that modeling this on Social Security or Medicare and looking at it because we think that has been politically more palatable, looking at it as a self-funded, a cohort-funded benefit. This benefit, what we've modeled here, is it would go into effect. We pretended it was enacted, that it had been in 2015. People then would not receive benefits until we had built up, the contributions had built up. So it would not go into effect until 2025. So to put a benefit into effect like that, it means that not only that we're not picking up under this proposal the liabilities of people who currently need long-term care, but also when you can see in analysis that it will not cover much of the baby boomer generation. So I would say that one of the things that we demonstrate in this analysis is that we'd be waiting a long time for these benefits that we showed you in baseline, and that leads me to think that both in order to get a benefit passed and because of what people need, that we'd have to think about some not self-funded, some general revenue, which we're happy to offer up the sources, but it is, but we need some general revenue in the interim.
I'm glad you said that. That's really important. Okay, so let's turn to questions, and hopefully we can cover some of the other things. And wow, okay. I'm going to go with Carl because he's had his hand up for a good 15 minutes.
Patient. Carl is patient.
Congratulations. I'm Carl Polzer with the Long-Term Care Discussion Group and a long-term care analyst. I did a paper for the Society of Actuaries about 3 or 4 years ago that sounded out about how much money was in savings in 401ks. And the way you've kind of designed, which was not a lot and mainly among the top 25%, this fits pretty well your waiting periods with that. And it's I think, congratulations. A couple comments though. On the financing side, if you're switching you're basically switching a lot of the financing from Medicaid to Medicare, and a payroll tax is more regressive. So, the sources of financing from Medicaid are general revenues, and granted, not as progressive as they were a month ago, but that's something to think about in terms of the capacity to add a 1% to the payroll tax. I was just at the NASI meeting, and there's going to be perhaps claims from Social Security to maintain that on that. So the other thing is the same political problem as with the Class Act is to include the people, non-aged population, which there's a lot more moral hazard there because I'm a caregiver for one of them. I know that. It seems like you've excluded that population.
Let me answer that, and then you'll go to the progressive, regressive. Thank you, Carl, because exclude is not what we had in mind. It was a program. The idea was targeted toward the elderly because that is where so much of the attention is. We also were inhibited in modeling. There is that your call should be for a call for, I see Gretchen nodding, a call for better data and more analysis on the under age 65 disabled population. Remember, 40% of the current total. So and we do believe that the proposal can be adapted for a significant portion of the population with disabilities. But your point is well taken.
Two points I want to make, Carl. Thank you for your comments. One is that precisely because of the issue of regressivity, we put this actually as a surcharge on the Medicare tax, which is far more progressive because of the lack of the cap and because it includes unearned income. So it's not perfect. I still haven't seen the perfect proposal, but that's a good point. The other point I want to make, and this relates to what Judy was saying too, it's very unlikely that you can, on a dime, switch a system from basically a welfare-based system to an insurance-based system. There's a glide path that is going to get you there. And there are a host of issues, as you're moving in that direction, a host of issues that are still out there that need to be addressed. We're leaving those issues for the next two people to write their paper. Right now.
Our next paper, right?
But, right, or our next. But, so I want to just acknowledge that.
Okay. Well, I would also say in that glide path that, I'll say it fast, is that looking at Cindy, this Medicaid is hugely important, not only because even when if you enacted this program, that the benefit is limited and low-income people and all of those things, but also the goal, given that whole previous panel, is to have one system. And so if Medicaid is where we can start building, strengthen Medicaid, which will be important, then it becomes essentially the foundation for the broader financing system.
Great. There's another gentleman in the back who's had his hand.
Yes, thank you so much for your work on this. It's fundamental. My name's Larry McNeely, National Coalition on Healthcare. I have a question, not an opinion. If there are, if someone were to say to this, well, you just made a very good case. In this case, your case was in support of a public insurance, a social insurance option to cover these high risks. Can't you make a similar case for some form of reinsurance or risk corridors to create the kind of private market that we haven't seen? The last major social insurance expansion was, in fact, Medicare Part D that did a little bit of that. That's not my perspective, but I'm trying to hear what your question.
So very briefly, I mean, the private market has voted with its feet already. And many of those companies, by the way, had reinsurance arrangements behind them. In a voluntary market, it's very difficult to price for that risk. Many companies left because rating agencies said, we're lowering your ratings if you're going to have uncapped liabilities. And that's precisely the reason why I sort of honed in, along with Judy and others, of course, on this catastrophic piece, because it's a clear case of market failure. So, reinsurers, by and large, they're not necessarily in the business of taking risk, they're in the business of spreading risk. So they insure insurance companies and spread the risk. If it's not working for the insurance companies, there's nothing a reinsurance company can do to make it work for them.
I was thinking public reinsurance or risk corridors.
Still doesn't address these issues.
I'm not sure it addresses, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to go, there's yes, you.
Barbara Gay from Leading Age. Just a kind of a technical question. Given that a lot of long-term services and supports are provided on an informal, unpaid basis, what triggers the waiting period? When does that start?
It would be an assessment. Back to common assessment tools, and they would have to be the same for public and private insurance, so it would be an assessment.
What's called the HIPAA trigger, that if an individual has 2 or more limitations in activities of daily living or significant cognitive impairment, that's part of it. And the reason why we chose that doesn't mean that there are people that don't have needs that don't hit that trigger.
It's a high standard.
It's a high standard for significant needs, but the reason is that makes it much more seamless between a public approach and private approach. And the handoff issue that Sheila raised earlier is a big one here, which is why we tried to use that same benefit trigger.
Yeah, okay, we have time for one more.
Yeah. How do you handle I presume, Michael Cook, presumably this is a wrap program to some degree. How do you handle how long-term care insurers get revenue with the interest rates low? In other words, they've got to invest the money. What do you do about that?
Yeah, so I'll try not to get too technical. That has really hurt the long-term care insurance industry. It has led to significant price increases, and there have been a lot of adjustments, and there's innovation occurring in the market now about how to keep rates stable and so on. But one of the recommendations that we make in the paper is to explore non-level funded products so that you take the interest rate risk out of the equation.
Yeah, we like this. Okay, so I just want to, can we just give Judy and Mark a round of applause? Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for this proposal. All right, this concludes, Matthew? I'm not in charge of wrapping up, Matthew is.
Sure. Hi, I'm Matthew McKern. I'm the Associate Director of Health here, and we can't wrap up until we thank everyone. And so that's my role today, is to sort of acknowledge and thank all of the people that contributed to this work. And there are always a large number of folks that contribute to a report and to an event like this. But when that is based on a report that summarizes 6 reports and 4 years of work, the list is a little longer, but I'm going to try to move quickly through it. So let me start with our panelists. First of all, I wanted to thank Gretchen Alkema. The SCAN Foundation, as people have alluded to, has not only supported BPC, but has supported a broader range of organizations that are doing important work in this area. And in addition to thanking Gretchen, I wanted to sort of call out Callie Peterson and Megan Juring, who are the 2 project officers that have worked with us on this. And Callie is here today. She gets hazard pay for coming from California to Washington in January. As we work our way through the rest of the panel, I want to thank Sheila Burke and Cindy Mann. I think you could tell from the many hats they wear the great insight that they brought to this. I will also call out that among the hats they wear they are members of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Future of Healthcare. That is an effort to provide resources to policymakers to come up with viable policy alternatives, and I think you can see why we want them as part of that group. Judy and Mark have contributed valuable work. That's a really tough issue here, and I want you to know that you can look at the detail, and their full report is available on our website. Anne who led the discussion today and did a fantastic job, has been involved, a key contributor throughout this project. And so if you go to the individual reports, she was very much a part of all of that. As we turn to individuals within BPC, Catherine Hayes is the director of the health project, and she is at the center of all of this work. Among the staff that contributed, Marissa Salemi, Peter Feiss, and Natalie Weiner were responsible for doing the analysis, writing the reports, and managing the projects. And then finally for BPC, I want to call out Joanne Donovan, who coordinates communications for BPC in the health area, and her fingerprints are all over this. 2 things I wanted to call out as part of this. One is there was a discussion about better ways to coordinate STAP and Medicaid. I want to let you know that we have a project within BPC that's headed up by Ann Veneman and Secretary Glickman, and Bill Frist, Majority Leader, who are really trying to bring together the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health and Human Services. That work is underway, and the report will be released in March. And then finally, I want to say, and this sort of calls on a comment that Cindy made, the purpose of this report is to call out and to focus on this issue. We've touched on a number of topics here. It's a vast array of complex issues. If you go to the reports, they provide you more detail and background that I think is helpful. And then finally, thanks to all of you.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. For coming out and visiting. And I'm also reminded that Henry Claypool, who is also an advisor to BPC, has done a lot of the work here. Henry is here in the audience, and he's modestly saying that don't recognize me. Anyway, so thank you very much. And again, there's a lot of materials on the website. We encourage you to go there and dig in. Thanks.